Got it. Yesterday we had a wonderful talk from Matuli Mitra on generosity, and today's Samgrahavastus was kindly speech, and Maitrikaya is going to be telling us or talking to us with kindly words, hopefully. And after the talk, we'll have 10-minute break, and then we'll move into our discussion groups, and then it'll be lunch. Okay, so over to you, Maitrikaya.
Thanks, Pavra. I'll just change my view so I don't have to look at myself. It's scary enough. So, let us use words that do not cause us pain. Let us use words that do not hurt each other. Those truly are wholesome words. Let us use pleasant speech, where the words make people glad, not laying hold of others' faults. Let us use pleasant speech on others. The words of truth are ambrosial. This is eternally the case. As the old saying goes, words of truth cannot die. And good people, they say, are well grounded in truth, welfare and virtue. And the words which the Buddha speaks, words that lead to nirvana, putting an end to suffering, are the supreme words. So these are the words of Vangisha, a poet disciple of the Buddha, and they come from the Sutta Nipata. So I read them again. Let us use words that do not cause us pain. Let us use words that do not hurt each other. Those truly are wholesome words. Let us use pleasant speech, where the words make people glad, not laying hold of others' faults. Let us use pleasant speech on each other. The words of truth are ambrosial. This is eternally the case. As the old saying goes, words of truth cannot die. And good people, they say, are well grounded in truth, welfare and virtue. And the words which the Buddha speaks, words that lead to nirvana, putting an end to suffering, are the supreme words. So I want to follow that with words from our teacher Samgrahavastus. So all aspects of the Eightfold Path taught by the Buddha, practiced together, are meant to bring about a change in an individual that involves changes at intellectual, emotional and moral realms. So one might think that right speech as an independent stage or aspect is not necessary, and that speech being a kind of action should come under that aspect of right action. Since the effects of speech are not as immediately evident as those of bodily action, its potential and importance might be overlooked sometimes. But Buddhism considers speech as one of the most important principles as far as the individual human being and society is concerned. In Vajrayana Buddhism, mostly associated with Tibetan Buddhism, body, speech and mind are associated respectively with three psychic centers. The body is associated with the head center, speech with the throat center, and mind with the heart center. And there are many correlations of body, mind and speech. One of them being that the throat center, representing speech, lies between the head and heart centers. The head not only represents the body, but also the intellect or understanding, while the heart center represents our feelings and emotions. The fact that the throat center, often associated with the Buddha Amitabha, the red Buddha of love, lies in between the head and the heart center, means that speech shares the nature of both, that is, both our thoughts and emotions. Right speech, therefore, gives expression both to wisdom and to love or compassion. So speech or verbal communication is something that we have to engage in at all times. Whether we like it or not, we have to communicate. If we think about it, it's speech or verbal communication with the help of structured language that distinguishes us from the animal kingdom. If we reflect on it, a great part of our culture depends directly or indirectly on speech. So speech is important, and how we use words is important. Speech as its highest right speech, ultimately, as Bhante Sangharakshita said, gives expression to wisdom and love, the two great aspects of the enlightened mind. Right speech is a mindful practice. By understanding this practice, we commit to greater awareness of our body and mind and emotions. Mindfulness makes it easier to recognize what we are about to say, and so it offers us the freedom to choose what we speak. With right mindfulness, we learn to restrain ourselves in moments of anger, hostility, and confusion. Right speech or perfect speech is an important part of the practice of Buddhist ethics, the practice which leads to cultivation of virtue, truthfulness, and liberation. To the question, what is right speech? The Buddha answers that right speech can be divided into 4 components, namely abstaining from false speech, abstaining from slanderous speech, abstaining from harsh speech or hateful speech, and abstaining from idle chatter. But this talk is about more than right speech. It's about, indeed the whole retreat is about exploring the Samgrahavastus, the means of uniting the Sangha. So the Samgrahavastus originate in the Pali Canon. Particularly in something called the Hataka Sutta, as Vajrashura mentioned in his introduction to the retreat, and Atulya Mitra mentioned yesterday. So I'm not going to be any different, and I'm going to mention it as well. So in this sutta, the Buddha said, this following of yours, Hataka, is very large. How do you keep united? My teacher, it is by the 4 means of unification, which you taught that we keep united. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through generosity, then I use generosity. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through kind speech, then I use kind speech. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through beneficial activity, then I use beneficial activity. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through amplification or empathy, then I use exemplification or empathy. Sadhu, sadhu, hataka. This is just the way to unify a large following. Whoever has done so in the past has used these 4 great means of unification, likewise in the future and the present. So I'm going to talk about the second of the Samgrahavastus, kindly speech. And the first thing about speech is that it's important. So our human experience consists of these 3 aspects, as I've said, of body, speech, and mind. So everything we experience is experienced in terms of these 3 things. Buddhism, as we all know, is a path of transformation, or at least that's what it aims at. So it's a path of body, speech, and mind. In the dedication ceremony, which we started this retreat with, and we start all retreats with, it says, may our communication with one another be Sangha. So most of our communication with each other is through speech. So to put it poetically, the tapestry of the Sangha is woven from the threads of speech. So to make the most beautiful tapestry, we need the strongest, most beautiful threads. And the threads that make up the tapestry of Sangha is speech by and large. So if we're going to create Sangha, our speech has to be true, it has to be strong, and it has to be beautiful. So I'd like to explore in this talk ways in which we could improve our speech and so weave a more beautiful, strong tapestry that is Sangha. So speech is important, as I said, because it's essential to the creation of Sangha. It's also important because our lives are full of words, at least for most of us. We have to include the written word here too, under speech, particularly how we use words online, where we often seem to forget the effects or the power of our words. So let's for a moment look at the opposite of this Samgrahavastus of kindly speech, which would be harsh speech. So the basic reason for avoiding harsh speech is because it's conducive to unskillful mental states and diminishes skillful mental states. Buddhaghosa, the 5th century Indian Buddhist commentator, translator and philosopher, defines harsh speech like this: the kind of speech by which one makes both oneself and another harsh. This kind of speech, that is harsh speech. So he says, harsh speech is entirely harsh volition, initiating an effort by body or by speech to wound another's vital feeling. Though I think this is important. So our intention is important. There's an intention to hurt, or as Buddhaghosa says, wound another's vital feeling. And in a commentary on a sutta, Buddhaghosa gives a number of examples to make this clear. So a little boy ran away into the dangerous forest, ignoring all his mother's orders not to go into the forest, though she shouted at him not to go. So she said to him, "I hope you get chased by a wild buffalo." So when he got into the forest, a wild buffalo, of course, appeared in front of him and threatened him. So the boy thought, let it happen not as my mother said, but as she thought in her heart. So the buffaloes froze to the spot in front of the boy, and the boy escaped. So because of the gentleness of the mother's mind, it was not harsh speech on her behalf. So there was no intention to wound her son's vital feelings. Buddhaghosa goes on to say that teachers and preceptors sometimes say of their pupils, "What is the use of these shameless and heedless brats? Drive them out." Yet in reality, they wish for their success in learning and attainment. There's another aspect to this though, that on the other hand, speech can sound gentle but actually be harsh. Buddhaghosa gives I find a bit of a chilling example of this. He gives an example of a murderer standing over his victim, whispering, "You're going to have a nice peaceful sleep." So this is from a commentary to the Sammaditha Sutta. So we're constantly, you might say, bombarded by words. We're churning out words, and these words are all expressions of our thoughts. They're manifestations of our mental states. So manifestations of skillful and unskillful mental states. So our mental states are being communicated often through this avalanche of words. We're constantly communicating the state of our mind through these words, and this has an effect. What we say will have an effect on us and of course on others who we come into contact with. What we hear and read affects us, and it also affects others. Speech is a manifestation of our consciousness, and speech is constantly modifying that consciousness. So what we say and write or hear and read has an effect on our mind, and by extension on the mind of others as we communicate. And speech is an action. And actions has consequences, as you're aware, according to the law of karma. And karma refers to the experience of cause and effect over a period of time. We perform an action, and sometime later we begin to experience its results. We plant, say, a mango seed, and many years later we taste the fruit. The other level of understanding of karma has to do with the quality of the mind at the very moment of action. When we experience a mental state of love, say, there comes naturally along with it a feeling of openness and love that's immediate. That's the immediate fruit. And also in a similar way, when we're caught up in moments of greed or hatred, in addition to what future results might come about, we also experience the painful energies that arise with those states. So unskillful speech has adverse consequences, and skillful speech has beneficial consequences. So skillful speech in this sense is a question of ethics. So practicing skillful speech, we're doing so in order to purify our own actions in the area of speech. Usually when we talk about ethical precepts, we talk just about one speech precept, that of truthful speech. But at ordination we take on 10 precepts, 4 of which relate to speech. Truthful speech, kindly speech, helpful speech and harmonious speech. So I want to just concentrate on just harmonious speech. So harmonious speech tends to create harmony and discourage disharmony. Harmonious speech enriches the lives of those around us and tends to promote an atmosphere of cooperation, which is essential to the life of Sangha. It's essential to the health of the spiritual community. So as I said, in terms of the precepts, we practice these in order to purify our speech. They're how we train ourselves to be more skillful in terms of speech, in our communication with others. More skillful in terms of conversations with others and every way we use words. It's how a Buddha would behave naturally and spontaneously using words, and how we would if we were enlightened. And of course we're not enlightened, at least I'm not anyway. And so we have to make an effort to practice these precepts so we don't lapse in too often into old habits of exaggeration and gossip and harshness. So I want to talk about taking the subject of kindly speech to a different level than the 4 speech precepts. It's kindly speech, priyavadata, in terms of the 4 Samgrahavastus. The 4 Samgrahavastus, the 4 means of unifying the Sangha. So priyavadata, kindly speech, is also called affectionate speech, speaking to people in an emotionally positive manner. So Bhante Sanghasrita said it's the rule within the spiritual community. The rule among those who are engaged in building what he calls a Buddha land. It's the verbal expression of positive emotion, and at its best, it's an expression of spiritual insight. It's the expression of delighted awareness of people's spiritual potential. And from that point of view, we can experience it in the way we speak to our friend, when we speak from our very depths, from the place where we touch even in silence. So the gap between our thoughts and immediate expression. If we speak from that place, we speak from a place of real meaning and deeper feeling. We speak, or we delight in the awareness of our friends' potential. So Priyavadata, kindly speech as a Samgrahavastus, corresponds more or less to the fourth speech precept of harmonious speech, I think. But it's slightly different in its intention. Behind harmonious speech in terms of the precepts, there's this intention to purify one's speech, to become more ethical in terms of our speech. Priyavadata, as one of the Samgrahavastus, the motivation is to create Sangha, to create the spiritual community. So harmonious speech as a precept, we practice for our own sake. And Priyavadata is practiced for the sake of the whole spiritual community. It's a much wider, expansive ideal. Essentially, it's the speech aspect of the Bodhisattva ideal. The ideal of practicing the spiritual life and attaining enlightenment, not just for one's own sake, but for the sake of others too. In fact, for the sake of all beings. So kindly speech, harmonious speech as a Samgrahavastus is an expression of that Bodhisattva ideal, and it expresses the altruistic or other regarding aspect of the spiritual life. So speech at this level is concerned with creating the conditions which help the spiritual community, the Sangha, to grow. And of course, if we set up the conditions that helps the Sangha to grow, we help ourselves too, as well as others, because we're part of that community. We need the Sangha to help us to fulfill our spiritual potential. So as always in Buddhism, what helps others helps ourselves. And Bhante Sangharashita has said that we can't help others without helping ourselves, and we can't help ourselves without helping others. So harmonious speech is the highest level of speech, but we don't disregard the other levels of speech, of truthfulness, affectionate speech and helpful speech. We need to be constantly mindful of our speech in all of its aspects because of the effects it can have on not just others but ourselves too. They are an expression of mental states, but they can also create mental states. We need to practice these. We need to keep an awareness of all aspects of our speech if we're going to ensure our speech is harmonious. And the Bodhisattva doesn't limit how they can become more other regarding by practicing kindly speech. It's important for us to remember that when we talk about other regarding, we don't ignore ourselves. We are one of the beings that come under the umbrella of this term, all beings. So it's not just about how we use speech externally. How we talk to ourselves has an effect. The unspoken word can be just as powerful. It sets us up. It sets up mental states that can have an effect externally too. So I'd like to move on now and talk about the effects of speech. So I'd like to look at the effects that speech has. Sometimes I think we don't actually see the effects of our speech. We don't recognize the effects that our words can have on others. But they do have effects. They do affect people we come in contact with. Just think of the effects that other people's words might have had on you. And then maybe it might be easier to see or get a feel for how our words can affect others. It's only when I think how others' words have wounded me that I can really appreciate just how my words can affect other people. And we can often be quite careless with our words. Words can, though, be used quite consciously for good. And that's what kindly speech as a Samgrahavastus is about. But how do we do this? So this is a bit of a challenge for us. So maybe you can accept a challenge, at least over the period of this retreat. But there's no reason why it should stop there. So I'm going to challenge you to practice kindly speech more. Do you remember, well, maybe everybody didn't do it, but do you remember as a kid saying to each other, I dare you? Or if it really got serious, you say, I double dare you. And there was an air of excitement around whenever that dare was there. And now we might be all grown up and sophisticated now, but I'm going to say I dare you, and maybe even I double dare you to take on this challenge. So here's what you have to do. First, clean up your speech. Many of us can slip into old habits of swearing all too easily. I know I can sometimes throw in a word here and there for no good reason. Or possibly for you, it may be still a feature of your speech. So I'm going to say, give it up. This kind of speech is just usually a habit. So swearing and cynical speech can be like smoking or any other habit. I remember I took up smoking to show how grown up I was. And harsh, uncouth speech, which is what swearing is, we often start doing for the same reason. When I was growing up, it was a way of showing you were tough, and to some extent it was a defense mechanism. If you gave off this sense of bravado by swearing, it was like some kind of armour. But if we do something often enough, it becomes a habit. So just as we become a smoker through force of habit, we can also become a person who swears by force of habit. And the real proof of us growing up is giving up these habits of adolescence. So if we have any habits of speech like this, we need to give them up in order that we can transform our speech to the level of kindly speech. So delete the expletives. That's the first challenge. So cynical speech is destructive as of any real sense of community. It divides rather than unites. It creates barriers between people. Apart from that, it has a huge effect on our mental states. I think I was probably one of the most cynical people in the world before I started practicing. The first thing is that it becomes a vicious circle. We think these thoughts and then we express them, and this has the effect of solidifying them within us. And in no time at all, we become a cynical person. It's the same with an awful lot of mental states, and it's not very attractive. And it can be just as coarse and ugly as constant swearing. So this is another aspect of this first challenge. Give up the cynical speech. So usually when we talk about people behind their backs, we mean backbiting or gossip. So the second challenge is to be aware how and when we do this, and maybe even why. What's the motivation for this kind of speech? When we talk unkindly about someone or pass on juicy pieces of gossip, what are we trying to achieve? So if you find yourself in a situation like this, just try to stop. Just bring some awareness to it and just leave things unsaid. So for the sake of harmony, for the sake of kindness, the second challenge then is to be aware of talking negatively behind people's backs, criticizing, backbiting, gossiping. And I would like to suggest that you turn that around and talk positively behind people's backs. So this is the third challenge. Instead of talking negatively behind people's back, talk positively behind people's back. Rejoice in them when they're not there. I don't think many people in our Sangha need to be reminded about this. I hear quite a lot of rejoicing of others in conversations that I have with various people I meet. But then maybe it's no harm if we're reminded of things now and then. Rejoicing creates such an atmosphere of goodwill and friendliness in which harmony seems to flourish and grow. Another aspect of this is appreciating what people do. And I know personally the effect this has. Expressing appreciation for the work people do, for example, around the centre, that keeps things running smoothly. There's a centre team, of course, but those other people who just muck in and help when things need doing. The recent Sangha gathering we had was a prime example. On the day of the event, setting up, the willingness of people just to do things that were needed. And of course there was always Dave Culver with his cakes, ever there, like, you know. And it's important that we express appreciation for this. So this is another aspect of this. I'm going to give you an example personally. Richie Mooney and I run a study group together. And the last meeting of the year, one of the guys took it on himself to act as a spokesperson for the group. And in effect, eulogised Richie Mooney and I. He rejoiced in the fact of us giving up our time and effort for the group, and also what he personally got from being part of the group. By no means is that why we do what we do. We aren't looking for praise, but it does have an effect when someone does that. Most of you will know the effects of rejoicing at events in the centre, at mitra ceremonies, or when people take on or move on from particular roles. And we've all benefited from these rejoicings, from the uniting of the Sangha that results. When we give voice to a person's qualities like this, it's like we're calling them by their real name. We really bring out the best part of them and give expression to it. I think this also happens when we get ordained and are given these names. Your real name is seen and you're being called by it. And for me, that the challenge has been living up to that real name. And once I'm called by it, so every time I hear my name, I'm reminded. And I imagine that's probably the same for every other order member here. So the act of rejoicing brings out the best in all of us. And this is what makes it a Samgrahavastus. This is what creates the magic that happens. This is what creates the magic of the Sangha. So fourthly, we can encourage each other. So this requires positive emotion and confidence. And of course, the positive emotion which we start to cultivate in the metta practice. But also I feel personally I gained confidence from developing loving kindness. Confidence that I was and could be a better person than I ever thought I was. So what we simply do is just encourage each other. It seems simple, but it can be difficult. We may need to raise our heads above the parapet of our anxiety, our fear, our self-concern in order to encourage others. We may need to go beyond our narrow selves, and even take our courage in our hands. So this is about giving invigorating words to our friends. It's not about platitudes. There's no dares when things fall apart for people. Look at the word, encourage. It implies to me giving courage to people. In order to encourage others, to give courage to others, we need to take responsibility for ourselves. So expanding beyond our self-concerns and empathizing with others. Doing what we can to uplift. And having faced our fears, help others to do the same. This is what giving courage is. This is what encouraging is. Giving energy to others to help them change and grow. So I want to finish by just reading some descriptions of kind speech I found while researching for this talk. So the Pali Canon describes kindly speech of the Buddha in verse. He is no speaker of the abuse, harsh and painful, hurting folk. His voice is gentle, kind and sweet, appealing to the hearts of folk and delighting to their ears. Folk will take his words to heart and set great store by all he says. And there's a common list of epithets for kind speech, also found within the Pali Canon. It says you should speak what is blameless or gentle, pleasing to the ear, lovable, going to the heart, courteous, pleasing, and attractive to many people. Those who talk angrily, full of wrath and proud, carp at each other's failings when they meet, and take delight in blame and finding fault, and in their rivals' fall. Thus speaks a sage, not angry, well restrained, with humble mind, not laying down the law, not curious, but wisely speaks fair speech, welcomes the kindly word, rejects the cruel, knows not resentment, does not carp at faults, does not retort, nor crushes rival down, nor from the issue speak, or true it is. The Aryan's words alike instruct and please. Be a uniter of the divided, a promoter of friendships. Harmony is his delight. He exalts harmony. He is passionately fond of harmony. He becomes a speaker of words that promote concord. So the huge effect of a few kind words, passing on of praise, the value of encouragement, the simple awareness of somebody, patience with others because they see the world so differently to us, helping people to understand each other, and the giving of this energy to others to change and grow. This to me is Priyavatata, this kindly speech, the second of the Samgrahavastus. So I talked about these 4 challenges that I, a little tongue-in-cheek, dared you to practice. So I just go through them again, and maybe you can use them as a template for discussion in the groups. So can you take up this challenge, and which do you need to emphasize? So first clean up your speech. Do you slip into these old habits of swearing all too easily? Or maybe it's still a feature of your speech. So I'm going to say, give it up. Delete the expletives. But also be aware of the cynical speech that you might engage in, because this does have a huge effect on others and our own state of mind. Secondly, be aware of how we talk negatively behind people's backs, even in small ways, backbiting, and how we can even take pleasure in passing on juicy bits of gossip. The third challenge is to turn that backbiting and gossip around and talk positively behind people's back, rejoicing in them when they're not there. How easily do we do that? Fourthly, encouraging others, putting our heads above the parapet and taking the chance to give courage to our friends, letting go of our fears and our anxieties. So that's your challenge. Thank you.
I better be careful what I say after that. But thank you, Maitrikaya. What really struck me was just the power of words and the power of your communication and the passion you have for words and how clearly and beautifully you've communicated the effect words have on us, from the words of enlightenment to the words of appreciation, and how that creates Sangha. So thank you, Maitrikaya, very much. You definitely communicated a body of love, which is your name. So we'll have a 10-minute break now and then move directly into our groups. So see everybody in 10 minutes.